Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Thursday edition of Sports Speak. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Excited to be joined today by someone from Metuchen High School like me. We've got Nick Pocchia here to help break down the NBA season. Nick, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into the NBA preview, of course, the big news in sports this week, Joe Kelly throwing at the Astros hitters, the first one to really target the Houston Astros hitters, and getting an 8-game suspension for it. Dave Roberts also suspended a game. Tim, what do you make of the suspension?
I mean, to me, it's almost like the fans want him to get a raise rather than a suspension. But, I mean, overall, I understand the history. You have to remember that these two teams did face off back, in the 2017 World Series, and Dodgers feel like they got robbed. Now, I know Joe Kelly wasn't on that team, but you have to remember he was on the team the year after of the Boston Red Sox, in which, at the same time, he feels like that they should have had an easier World Series to go on and win because he felt they were also then stealing signs. Now, listen, I understand what Joe Kelly did was wrong, but 8 games when he never even hit someone, he threw over the head of Carlos Correa. He didn't, or I shouldn't say, he threw over the head of Alex Bregman. He didn't hit Carlos Correa on a breaking ball, might I mind you. To me, I mean, first off, the Correa one didn't even look intentional. You could tell it was a slider that got away. The fastball, okay, you can make a debate, whatever, but 8 games in an asterisk season, 8 games is way too much. And I understand that you're trying to make an instance to show that this isn't going to be acceptable, but giving a guy 8 games for something like that just to me isn't justified. And let's be honest, there's going to be more people throwing at the Houston Astros anyways. They're asking for it.
I know, in 8 games in a 60-game season, that's equivalent to like 22 in a regular season. That is a massive suspension. And talking about also, I mentioned this in our group chat, Tim, about how, the umpires did not throw Joe Kelly out of the game, yet they gave him this massive suspension. It shows that Rob Manfred and the umpires are not really on the same page with this, which is not really good if the commissioner and the officials are not on the same page when it comes to suspensions and handling this whole Astros situation. But I think this was just step one. I think we might see more of this going forwards. But like you said, Joe Kelly was also on a sign-stealing team in 2018. Now, he did leave the Red Sox after that season, so maybe he was just against the sign-stealing in general. We don't know. But I think it's interesting how he's being just hailed as a hero now on social media for all this. Poach, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I'm kind of going to go along with what you guys are and I've had an issue with Commissioner Manfred since earlier this season and beyond that point, but especially with the season restart. Baseball had an opportunity to especially have the month of June entirely to themselves, come back, probably get better ratings than they've had since Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were playing. And yet that didn't really happen. And we look at this situation and you go, like I know Tim alluded to, the Houston Astros were given immunity, at least the players, for honest testimony in theory. And here's a guy who will say took justice into his own hands in a certain regard, didn't even hit anybody, made a face, said a couple words, and he gets 8 games. That doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, and I mean, just the whole situation, too. None of the Houston Astros players actually got any sort of suspensions for any of this that went on in 2017. Yet Joe Kelly is getting this big suspension. I understand penalizing him in some way, also because, he caused the benches to clear, and with everything, with how concerned they are now with all the Marlins positive tests about players congregating, I'd understand maybe a 1 or 2 game suspension for that. But 8, I think, is outrageous. He is appealing the suspension, so that will probably go down. Dave Roberts also got a 1-game suspension, which he served last night. But we're going to move right now into the NBA. That's what Poach is here for, because today the NBA season restarts for the first time since March 11th. Pelicans Jazz is the first game today, then the Lakers and Clippers match up. Poach, I'm going to start with you because, I mean, the Lakers are coming in strong. LeBron James now with his gray beard ready to go. What do you make of the Lakers and Clippers in the West? And do you think there's anybody else who can really compete with them as we go forwards here in the restart and into the playoffs?
Yeah, that's great. Those are the best teams, in my opinion. I've been saying it. I remember the night that Kawhi Leonard joined the Los Angeles Clippers and Paul George very quickly was traded to the LA Clippers. And I looked at that roster and said, this could be a dangerous team. You look at a Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams. I know their status is a little bit up in the air. They had left the bubble and now are coming back in. Just a really tremendously deep roster. And I think that's obviously the biggest advantage they're going to have over a Los Angeles Lakers team. Nobody's going to argue that LeBron James and Anthony Davis are the best duo in national basketball, right? The difficult thing comes into is that bench as deep as that team is deep? And I think the answer is no. And that's why I really like the Clippers. At the same time, I know you're asking about teams that have a chance. I never count out James Harden and Russell Westbrook. I still like the Houston Rockets. Maybe D'Antoni figured something out with the small ball and PJ Tucker running the five. We will see. And I'm also a big fan of that Nuggets team. I really like Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and that's another team that's really, really deep. They go 11 or 12 deep, and now obviously seeing Bol this week, they have a really dangerous roster of guys who could go off at any given time.
I think it would be interesting if Denver and Houston match up in the playoffs, because with how tall Denver is with their lineup, they had Jokic at the point guard in one of the scrimmage games, and then with Houston with PJ Tucker as the center, I don't know how that would work out. But my one concern with the Clippers, you mentioned Harrell, Lou Williams, Beverly, the uncertainty that all of them are going to play in these first couple games. I mean, it doesn't really matter right now because we know they're going to be in the playoffs and they're going to be a high seed. But if this continues and if they're missing some guys, I mean, that advantage that they have on the bench is kind of going to go away, because the Lakers bench isn't awful. I mean, the Clippers have the better bench. I think we can all agree on that. But the Lakers aren't too far behind. Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you, because the Eastern Conference is also interesting. Milwaukee Bucks, probably the favorite, but you've got the defending champs in the Raptors. You've got the Sixers rejuvenated and healthy. You've still got a good Celtics team. I mean, there's a lot to make of in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, indeed, but I still look at the Eastern side, and I still think this is the Bucks' year to go and get something done. But at the same time, I am going to say this. When you look at Milwaukee's history, it kind of lies very similar to another team that you guys just mentioned on the Western Conference side of the Denver Nuggets. It's two teams that tend to put together great seasons, but then it's a constant disappointment. Now, I know the Raptors broke that streak last year, but I really think there's an opportunity this year for the Bucks to turn around and show they're the dominant team. I mean, overall, they've had a great start, and I know this little break helps them too, because if I'm not mistaken, before that little break as well, the Bucks are battling a couple key injuries, especially on the bench. Yes. So this allows people to get healthy as well. But, you know, I mean, for me too, the thing is, if you're an injured team, and I know the Nets we talked about a few weeks ago, they're nowhere near NBA title status right now, but we thought this was going to help them. Turns out most of their players now aren't even showing up in the bubble. But if you're a team that was hurt, you're going to best benefit. You know, I'm eager to see how the Boston Celtics come out of this as well. I don't think they have a shot at the Bucks, but they very well could find themselves in, you know, an Eastern Conference Finals kind of deal. And as well as I would even say the Sixers. I mean, I really want to trust the process, but I've had nothing to trust of late, so I just don't really know. I'm hoping that they're healthy. I hope Joel Embiid can stay healthy, and overall, I really hope to see the Sixers as well make a pursuit towards the NBA championship. But I really don't think there's anyone that has anything on the Lakers or the Clippers out there in the West.
I think Milwaukee's the only team who has any sort of a chance at the Lakers or the Clippers, but I still think they are the two best teams, and I think we can agree on that. But you brought up the Nets and how, you know, they're going with a roster. Half these guys weren't even in the NBA this season, and Washington is the same way. And, I mean, you've got some teams in the West who really should not be there. And, Poch, I'm going to turn it over to you for this, because I feel like the NBA, me and Tim have talked about this already, they want to get Zion Williamson in the playoffs. But, I mean, there are a lot of teams there that really do not belong in this situation. And they really have no chance. The Suns are like 5 games out. They'd have to win out to have any chance at even making the playoffs. I mean, I really feel like, I want to get your opinion, the NBA should have just gone straight to the playoffs like hockey is right now.
Right. I understand that, and I think you made the biggest point. They would really love to see Zion Williamson in the playoffs, kind of recreate that Michael Jordan versus the Celtics moment where he maybe has a great individual performance against the Lakers in the playoffs, and it's a great thing, and it's like a changing of the guard moment. And I think that's really the only reason they did it. Certainly, maybe some of these individual fan bases are a little bit excited to see their guys get out there again. I understand that it's been a 4-month hiatus, and a lot of it has to do with money and marketing, and we could televise a few more games that actually matter for the Phoenix Suns or the San Antonio Spurs, some of the teams that you're alluding to, or the Wizards, who, like you mentioned, have really depleted rosters. And I think that's all it came down to. I agree with you guys. I don't think it made the most sense to include some of these teams.
And now we've got some awards to talk about, because the season's just about wrapped up. We've still got a few more regular season games, but there's been a lot of consented ideas about who's going to win the various awards in the NBA. And just like me and Tim did with Zoe for the baseball preview, I'll start with you, Poch. Who do you have as your MVP for this season as we restart and just overall?
Right. Well, I think it's got to be Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, really just a phenomenal player on both ends of the ball this season. I continue to say that I'll spoil it. I don't know if we're going to talk about that, but he'd be my defensive player of the year as well. Just somebody who's excelling on both sides of the basketball court. LeBron James, absolutely, you can't underrate his achievements. Really, and people I don't think talk about this enough, really transformed his game, being an NBA assist leader, something that you didn't expect from LeBron James coming into the season, and obviously leading the Lakers to a really tremendous season. But at the same time, you look at what Giannis did. In my opinion, he was the best offensive player in the NBA. He was the best defensive player in the NBA. Playing on the team with the best record, it's hard not to give it to him.
Yeah, I agree. I think Giannis Antetokounmpo overall has been the best this season. LeBron, like you said, he's battled some adversity as he's gotten older, but he's kind of transformed his game and he's become better in some ways. And he's definitely better this year than he was last season with the Lakers. But I don't think it's enough to beat out Giannis for the MVP. Tim, are you in agreement on that too?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with 100%. And I believe one more year, LeBron will eventually get one more MVP to round out his career total. But overall, I mean, what a year for Giannis. And I'm not going to go and say Giannis is a bad defender, but has he taken it up a level this year? 100%. And then you look at that offense, always consistent. He's a powerhouse on the floor, and you better clear a lane when he's coming because he will dunk or finish over you. I really think Giannis is, again, I mean, he's arguably the best player in the league right now. He's on a whole nother level. And I mean, he's bringing back the physical game that we've missed for a little while. You have James Harden, step back three. So what? Steph Curry, step back. You're seeing the physicality out of Giannis, and that's what NBA was about. And I'm glad that we're seeing it back a little bit. And yet again, I think he's your MVP.
Yeah, and that really hits it home because guys like Harden, Curry, Lillard, and Westbrook, who have really become like some of the leaders of the NBA along with LeBron in recent years, have kind of gotten away from the physicality. It's more just about chucking up threes or trying to find a hole to get to the basket. So interesting to see Giannis trying to changing that. Nick already mentioned that he's his defensive player of the year prediction. I also agree. I think it's close between him and Rudy Gobert, but I think Giannis is the best defensive player. Tim, are you going to go with that too?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with that too. And I know it's very hard in terms of the NBA awards to see someone win MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. But this year, it just seems to be that stick. I mean, as somewhat of a Jazz fan, as more as I am of a Cavs fan, I'd like to see Rudy Gobert win. But to be honest, Rudy's numbers prior to this bubble going on wasn't up to par to where it's been the last 2 years. It hasn't been a bad season for the record, but it just hasn't really been up to par. It's still very good numbers, but I mean, again, I think Giannis has to be the guy for that as well.
I've never asked you. I've heard you say it a few times. How did you become a Cleveland Cavaliers fan from New York? I mean, I'm curious.
Okay. So this is going to sound very weird. I'm sure I'm going to get hate for this, but no, it actually had nothing to do with LeBron James. When I was young, I didn't really know basketball, so I didn't know who actually LeBron James was. As weird as that sounds, I was a Shaquille O'Neal fan. So when Shaq, towards the end of his career, when he left, from Miami over to Phoenix, and I followed the Suns for a little bit with Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire, he found his way in Cleveland, and that's when I really started liking the Cavaliers, and it kind of stuck for me. He was doing a good job. You had Ilgauskas over there, and a good little mix as well. Anderson Varejao. Those games used to be fun to watch, and the thing that when he was back in Phoenix, it was very hard to see them get nationally televised games. When he moved to Cleveland, it was like Shaq was on the TV every single night with LeBron. So for me, it just kind of stuck. Obviously now Shaq's gone and retired. I kind of stuck, with the Cavs a little bit. And obviously it's great to see an NBA title, but it's not promising for a good little while here in Cleveland.
Yeah, they're definitely in the rebuild mode. But let's move on now to Rookie of the Year. Poch, I'll start with you. I mean, the battle is between Ja Morant and Zion. How much would they value these few games Zion's going to play? But who's your pick for Rookie of the Year?
Yeah, I think it's got to be Ja Morant. Obviously, very impressive, 20 or so game stretch for Zion Williamson. And obviously in a full season setting, he's probably going to end up with the better year. But you really can't underrate what Ja Morant did for the Grizzlies, almost playing 500 basketball. Really like Jaren Jackson Jr. as well, so not to take anything away from him. But that's a really great emerging young team. Ja had a great season, and I expect him to win the award and have a really great career.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been some surprise rookies who have really stood out in a way. I mean, with the Heat as well, with Tyler Hero having a nice season with them getting in the rotation, undrafted Kendrick Nunn as well. But I think Ja overall, from the start of the season to the end, has been the best. He's looked really good in the scrimmages too. And Memphis, I mean, if I'm the Grizzlies, I'd be really frustrated right now because you've got the 8th seed, but now the NBA is to bring in 5 other teams now to try to take away that 8th seed from them. But they got to be motivated to play the best basketball they can and try to get in the postseason in Ja's rookie year. So it should be fun. And also, I mean, he's not winning rookie of the year, but Bol in these last few scrimmages has looked excellent. I don't know how that's going to translate to an actual regular season game that counts, but you know what? Right now, he's looking really good in the small sample size. Tim, are you going to go with Ja as well?
Yeah, this year I definitely have to agree with 100%. I would say the most we ever agreed. But, I mean, look at Memphis overall. The expectations for this season was somewhat low, and Ja Morant picked up the level almost like how a few years ago Donovan Mitchell did with the Utah Jazz. So, I mean, the way I look at it is Morant's going to be a great player for a good, a very good long time for this Memphis Grizzlies team, someone that they need. And, I mean, again, you mentioned as well, Nick, about Zion. I know Zion put together a good 20-game stretch, but I have a thing as well to me that's so like in all sports. If you play a fourth or not even a half of the season, for example, Mike Trout, I gave big flag to last year winning MVP. If you play an asterisk amount in the season, you shouldn't even be considered, even if you're upon the qualifiers for an award compared to someone that's shown up every single game and has, pushed all year long. To me, it would be a lot easier to give it to Morant compared to Zion. But yet again, this is the NBA. We never know. There is that favoritism towards Zion. I mean, something could happen, and they could say, hey, well, Zion's our rookie of the year. I mean, the MLB's done it, with Shohei Ohtani over Miguel Andujar and Gleyber Torres. So something like that also wouldn't surprise me.
If Zion happens to lead the Pelicans into the playoffs, I definitely wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But I want to move on to 2 awards that I think we might have a little more debate on. And we're going to start with Most Improved Player because there's a lot of considerations. There's been a lot of surprises in the NBA this season. Poach, I'm going to start with you. Who's your Most Improved Player?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Bam Adebayo. I think he's really had a tremendous season with the Miami Heat. Obviously, Jimmy Butler joining that team was a big part of it, but they had a really great year, and he took a lot of big steps. I know there's going to be a lot of talk. I even saw one prediction, somebody talking about Luka Doncic and some other second-year guys. I don't like that. They never give it to a second-year guy, but I'm a big fan of Bam Adebayo. Really like what he's done for this Heat team, and he's kind of revolutionizing the game a little bit into that mold of the Jokic and the Domantas Sabonis, the big men who can, play a little bit of defense and also facilitate, which, point center role that's becoming a new thing. But I got to go with Bam Adebayo.
Tim, how about you?
See, I'm going to go the opposite here. I would agree with Nick 100%, but I'm going to go with Brandon Ingram. I mean, the expectations with him moving over to New Orleans was yet again kind of low because we thought this was going to be a team that was not going to make the playoffs. They're young and rebuilding. But, I mean, Ingram found ways now to not just be productive offensively, but as well as defensively. And we saw at times throughout nights, especially on primetime TV, where he'd come out and just, score. Brandon Ingram, he's proven to be a star, and he's really, revitalized and put all his tools back together. And to me, he's starting to become that solid basketball player that we always knew he can be. It's just a matter, again, of how consistent was he on the floor? And this year we're seeing it. And I really think Brandon Ingram is overall, has really revitalized all facets of his game. And I really think he's a star of the future and should be in consideration for the Most Improved Player of the Year.
And I'm actually going to agree with you, Tim. I was between 3 people. I was between Bam Adebayo, I was thinking about Ingram, and then also Pascal Siakam, because think about it. He went from role player to starter. Now he went from starter to all-star, but they wouldn't give it to him twice in a row. So I'm going to go with Ingram, like you said, because, he was kind of overshadowed. Everybody talking about Lonzo Ball because of, how charismatic his father is, and nobody was really talking about Ingram when he was with the Lakers. And then he goes to the Pelicans. And when Zion Williamson was out for the first 3-4 months of the season, he kept them competitive, and he kept the Pelicans team, which, let's be honest, isn't that great aside from him. There's a lot of young guys, a lot of inexperienced guys, and Ingram kept them in the race, proved to be an all-star level player, and, he's really broken out. So I'm going to go with Ingram for that award. Last award, Coach of the Year. Poach, who you got?
I'm going to go a little bit off the board here. I'm go with Billy Donovan from the Oklahoma City Thunder. I mean, when you think back to, because I remember the day Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook trade happened, everybody going, the Thunder are loading up on draft picks. They're done. They're not going to be a competitive basketball team for the foreseeable future. And he took a roster, a very mishmash roster. You look at guys like Chris Paul, Danilo Gallinari, obviously Steven Adams, Dennis Schroeder, and was able to turn them into a very competitive playoff team, right? This is a high seed team in all likelihood, and it's pretty remarkable given the talent out west that a seemingly less talented, more disgruntled Thunder team is able to make the playoffs, and I attribute a lot of that to Billy Donovan's leadership.
Yeah, I mean, nobody saw the Thunder coming, and I mean, they're hanging well with like Houston, Utah, Denver, all good teams with a solid foundation. Chris Paul is in his later years. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been excellent. Dennis Schroeder, they've got a lot of nice mix over there at guard. Steven Adams has been great this year. I'm very excited to see how they do in the bubble. So, Tim, you in agreement, or are you going with somebody else?
I'm going with someone else. I have Nick Nurse for the Toronto Raptors. I mean, how about the year they've had? Let's be honest. Losing Kawhi Leonard, a lot of people lost, hope in Toronto this year, but yet still consistent. We knew they had those young pieces in which they were going to be a good team, but no one expected them to still be this good. I know you could make the argument they're not going to be able to compete with the Bucks, and they're not the Lakers and the Clippers, but if you told me after losing Kawhi, this team would have still been battling for a 3 seed or a 2 seed, I would have called you nuts, but they've been doing a very good job. And I think Nick Nurse is, well due. He didn't get it last year. So I think this is a great time for him to get it.
And this is going to be the only award, I think, where all three of us disagree, because I'm going with Eric Spoelstra with the Heat. I really like the way he's handled things with Jimmy Butler. And let's be honest, I think we all know he's not the easiest guy to coach. He's worn out his welcome at 3 different places, but he's done well with Jimmy Butler and a mix of young guys, like you mentioned earlier, Nick Bam Adebayo having an excellent year. I talked about Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, and they've looked really good in the scrimmages so far, too. And I think Spoelstra, I mean, people thought the Heat were going to be good this year, and I think a lot of people thought they were going to be a playoff team, but they're competing for the 4th seed in the East. I mean, I don't think people saw them doing that well with how competitive the East is below the Bucks. There's a lot of really good teams mixed in there, but they're really rising to the occasion. And if Jimmy Butler stays healthy and can work well with these young guys, they've got a really good chance moving forwards into the playoffs. So let's talk about it. The playoffs getting started soon. Nick, I'm going to start with you. Do you think anybody's going to knock out Memphis and get the 8th seed in the West?
Look, I hope that the NBA doesn't try and stage anything and get Zion in there, but in all seriousness, I would assume that the Grizzlies are going to hold that spot. I expect John Morant to come out very, very motivated. That's a good Grizzlies team that I think is going to be good for a lot of years to come. Obviously, Jaren Jackson Jr. and Dylan Brooks, another player I really like. I think they're going to be very motivated. They're going to come out very strong, and I expect them to maybe even give the Lakers, a run for the money in a game or two, maybe 5 or 6 game series. We'll see.
I actually think someone is, but it's not going to be Zion's Pelicans. I think the Portland Trailblazers, who are tied with the Pelicans right back there, just a couple games out, and Carmelo Anthony's slimmed down. He looks really good out there on the court right now. They've got Jusuf Nurkic back healthy, and he's looked awesome in these scrimmages. Zach Collins is healthy as well. And, of course, that backcourt of Lillard and McCollum, that could be so clutch in the playoffs. I think they have a good chance to sneak out and get the 8th seed. Like Nick said, I don't think they're going to have anything to do with the Lakers. Maybe steal a game, maybe 2. But I think they could get the 8th seed. Tim, how about you?
I'm still going to have to stick with Memphis more than I would like to say Portland would like to give a chance. But you have to remember, Carmelo Anthony plus the term success and NBA championship doesn't add together. And, I would like to see Zion make the playoffs, don't get me wrong. But to me, again, this feels like a setup. And to be honest, in terms of the Pelicans, we're going to see tonight just what they're made of. If they give the Jazz a run for their money, and I know the Jazz, they're missing Bogdanovich, who's a huge part of that offense. They can turn around and struggle tonight, but they're still a very, very good defense more than they are an offense. But, I think if the Pelicans, they come out and they put together a good game, then we can kind of tell how the rest of these games are going to go for them. But if they lose to the Jazz and they get blown out of the water, I think that's the last of the Pelicans. I think the Grizzlies, they're going to come out, they're going to be consistent, they're going to win games, and they're going to continue to claw and claw and claw until it's over with. But I still have Memphis at that 8.
And I mean, I think the Pelicans are going to have a good chance, and their schedule is pretty easy. I mean, that's another NBA little assistance to them because not every team got the same strength of schedule. The Pelicans were supposed to have an easy schedule, and they still got that easy schedule going in. The Jazz is actually one of their toughest games, so they're playing a lot of teams that are below them, which will be motivated to beat them, don't get me wrong. But with Zion Williamson back in the bubble, ready to go, also after he got his 4-day quarantine when everybody else gets 10 to 14, I don't really understand that. But that's besides the point. He's there and ready to play. It's going to be close, but I still like Portland going into this. Let's move on to the East because there's 6 teams locked into the playoffs. There's 3 battling for 2 spots. The Magic, who are the only one of the 3 that actually seem to have like their overall rotation there. The Nets, who are without basically everybody, and Washington, who was without John Wall. I mean, they're without basically everyone as well. So, Poach, who do you have getting the 7 and 8 seed in the East?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with Brooklyn and the Orlando Magic, kind of just assuming it's going to stay the way it is. Like you alluded to, I know the Nets are a depleted roster, but the Wizards as well. And I don't think, obviously, the Magic are probably the most intact, quote-unquote, of those few teams, but I don't view any of them as being particularly motivated because I guess your prize is you could either go home or you could go face Giannis in the Bucks and stay in the bubble for another week. I don't know how desirable that is for any of them, quite honestly.
Yeah, and something else to mention with the Nets, if they do not make the playoffs, they get their lottery pick, which is, I believe, top 5 or top 7 protected. So they could get a decent guy to complement Kyrie and Durant. I'm not saying they bag it and just don't even try, but you know what? I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if they don't make the playoffs. And the Wizards overall, even though they don't have their main guys, they've actually looked pretty good so far in the scrimmages. Rui Hachimura has looked excellent on that team. And not Thomas Satoransky. I forgot who else I was going to say. But Rui Hachimura has been really solid with this team. And they've got a lot of decent guys. Troy Brown Jr. getting thrown in there as well with that offense that can make something happen. And they've got a lot of young guys that have spent some time with the team. And, you know, the Wizards are also hungry, too, because these last few years have not really gone their way. And they'd love to get into the playoffs, I think. And the Nets, like I said, out of the 3 teams, they've got the best chance in the draft if they end up not making it. So I say Orlando hangs on to the 7 seed. Like we said, they're the most intact of those 3 teams. And I think Washington is going to end up beating out Brooklyn for the 8 seed because at least the Wizards have guys who played in the NBA this year. The Nets have Timothy Wawu-Cabarrot in their starting lineup. I don't know how that's going to work. So, and a new coach, too. They've got Jacque Vaughn, too, who has not coached a regular season game really that much for this team yet since Kenny Atkinson got fired. So, you know, I think Washington's getting in. Tim, what about you?
Yeah, to me, it wouldn't be fitting, I think, if the Brooklyn Nets make the playoffs without Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant on that roster. And I know we alluded to the fact, too, Eddie, a good while ago, wondering, you know, hey, the season got extended an extra couple of weeks. You know, Kevin Durant technically by now should be healthy, would you consider? But obviously the answer is no. No Kyrie Irving. I mean, this roster is utterly, utterly depleted. But let's be honest. I mean, hey, if they lose out, and they get, you know, a draft pick out of this, this is huge for a team that, again, has 2 stars and needs some more depth in terms of being a full-on title contender. Now, I look as well, you know, the Magic, I think they're going to be easily in. You know, bringing your starting rotation is huge, but I'm kind of, you know, stuck in between of really who does make that final 8 seed, Eddie, because overall, whoever makes that 8 seed, they're going to be crying, as I think Nick said, for a week, knowing that they're going to have to face the Bucks because, listen, it's already a stretch enough being in the bubble, but now you have to be in a bubble for an extra week, suffering, and knowing that you're just going to lose in 4 games anyways. To me, it's almost like a waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, the East, it's really top-heavy in a way because 7 and 8 they're gonna get killed by the Bucks and whoever ends up with the 2 seed, whether it's Toronto, Boston, Philly. I mean, it's not gonna be pretty for those teams. But before we wrap up, of course, we got to give our overall predictions for who's getting through here in Orlando. So I'm gonna start with the Eastern Conference Finals, who I think are gonna be the 2 teams and who's gonna come out. I think it's gonna come down to Milwaukee. Obviously, I think they're the best team, and this might come as a bit of a surprise. But I like the Sixers. I think they can do something. I think Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons could maybe pull off an upset in the playoffs and sneak into the Eastern Conference Finals. But that does not mean they're beating the Bucks. I think Milwaukee takes the Eastern Conference Finals in 6. And then the West, I don't see how you could say it's not Lakers-Clippers. There's going to be a couple solid teams like Nick talked about. The Denver, the Rockets both have some additions, but I'm going Lakers-Clippers. I think that's going to be a hard-fought 7-game series, but I think the Lakers are going to get it. And then Lakers-Milwaukee, I've got the Lakers in 6 winning the finals. Poach, what about you?
Yeah, in the Eastern Conference, I'm going to go a little bit different. Obviously, I'm going to have the Bucks in my Eastern Conference Finals, but I'm going to have them facing the Boston Celtics. I'm a big fan of what Jason Tatum has done for that team this season, obviously Kemba Walker, and I expect Jason Tatum to have a playoff performance very reminiscent of a few years back going up against LeBron James and giving him a very tough time. And I'd still expect the Bucks to win that matchup. I think Giannis is very motivated. And out west, I'm going to go with the Lakers and Clippers like we alluded to. And I'm going to give the edge to the Clippers in that series, probably in 7 games. I think it's going to be a very hard-fought series. But Kawhi Leonard is just something else in the playoffs. I think Paul George looked really good in scrimmages the other day, and I expect him to be in great form. Obviously, they've had even more rest than anybody else. They barely play basketball, but they'll be ready to go. And then in the NBA Finals, got the Clippers, we got the Milwaukee Bucks. And again, I'm going to give it to the Clippers. I do think that the Lakers and Clippers are the 2 best teams in basketball, regardless of the tremendous regular season, the Milwaukee Bucks. And I'm going to say the Clippers are probably going to wrap it up in about 6 games. Obviously, we really like what Giannis has done this season, but that Clippers roster is really tremendous, 1 through 12, and I expect them to be a really tough team to take out in the playoffs and in the NBA Finals.
Lastly, Tim, how do you map it out?
I look at that East, and it's very hard to disagree in regards to what you mentioned, Eddie, between the Bucks and the Sixers. I still think this is the Bucks here. They have a lot to prove. But, Nick mentioned he thinks in a 7-game series that it's going to be the Clippers. I have it the opposite. I think, the Western Conference Championship, it's going to go 7. And if it doesn't go 7, to be honest, that's going to be a disappointment. But I have the Lakers overall winning the Western Conference. And again, I still think when we mentioned a few podcasts ago, Eddie, about the NBA champion, I had the Lakers. I still have the Lakers winning the NBA championship this year. Still fitting, for the Kobe Bryant thing and everything else that it seems like everyone's forgotten about because of COVID. I would like to see the Lakers go out there and win it for Kobe.
So one last thing before we go. This video is premiering, as you know, guys, at 5:30. So this will be wrapping up just before the Pelicans-Jazz game starts. So might as well give our picks for tonight's games. Pelicans-Jazz, Zion's return against Donovan Mitchell. Poach, who's winning this one?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Pelicans. I don't know. I think Zion's very excited. Like we've alluded to, he's had plenty of rest this season. All these guys have had plenty of rest, but only playing 20 or so games. And I think he's going to be tremendously motivated to show what he can do in a more competitive and meaningful game than maybe the ones he was playing in earlier this season. And I expect the Pelicans to come out and win this game tonight.
Tim?
I'm going to have to go with the Utah Jazz on the opposite side, but it really all depends. Again, no Bogdanovich, so that means Joe Ingles steps in for the Utah Jazz. And let me tell you something. That last scrimmage game, Joe Ingles looked terrible. Couldn't make a shot. Sure, his passing game was okay, but there was nothing else he did productive on the floor. If Mike Conley struggles to open up this game, it's going to be all Donovan Mitchell. And really, that's the only thing Utah can look forward to is Donovan in a big moment coming up big. But if Mike Conley's productive, him and Donovan are going to have a day of a lifetime. But if they don't, it could be the Pelicans. But I still have the Jazz coming out strong. I think, Donovan as well, he didn't have that good of a game offensively the last scrimmage as well. I think he comes out scoring right away for Utah. And the Pelicans, it's going to be a close game. I just don't think they have what it takes to beat Utah quite yet.
And I'm going to disagree with you, Tim. The Pelicans, like I said, they're not going to make the playoffs, in my opinion, but I think they're going to come out strong in game 1. Utah, we know there was a lot of tension during the hiatus between Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. And you said no Bogdanovich. That's huge for this team because he's one of their big shooters. I mean, Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Jrue Holiday, Zion, that is such an elite lineup out there for the Pelicans. I think they're going to be able to steal game 1. I think they're going to go into a little bit of a lapse of confidence, though, in the coming games, and they might drop a couple to teams that are a little worse than them because I think they play Phoenix and Sacramento. I could see them losing those games, but I think they're coming out on top against the Jazz tonight. Final thing before we wrap this up, first of probably many matchups in Orlando between the Lakers and Clippers in the coming months. Poach, who's pulling this one out?
Yeah, I know I said I got the Clippers winning the championship, but I'm going to go with the LA Lakers tonight. I think LeBron wants this championship so badly for so many reasons, and I think he's just going to be ready to go right out the gate, whereas Kawhi Leonard always seems to have that relax, we're playing the long game approach, but I think LeBron wants to make a statement tonight in the bubble. Anthony Davis is going to have the goggles going. He looks kind of like Kareem now. It's going to be tough to beat that team.
And Tim?
I have to go the opposite end. I think the Clippers do get a good quick start, but again, for me, based upon what Nick mentioned before, it's almost like we're in total opposites of the way we see things going on between both of these teams. I think the story is written the opposite way. I could see the Clippers coming out having a really good game and making the final statement essentially before that perhaps Western Conference championship bout. I think the Clippers, again, they'll come out good. That bench is strong. No one really knows how the Lakers bench is going to perform. And to be honest, I really think you're going to see their bench get a lot of usage throughout the remaining of these bubble games, Eddie, just to see if that depth that they have could even live up to the hype. I mean, expect J.R. Smith probably to play 30 dang on minutes on the floor.
That's a little scary to think of J.R. Smith now playing competitive basketball again after what happened with Cleveland a couple of years ago. But once again, I'm actually going to go with Nick on the pick. I think the Lakers tonight, just because the Clippers have the odds stacked against them, probably no Montrezl Harrell. Lou Williams is out the first two of these games. Beverly and Shamet, neither of them have played a scrimmage. So, I mean, that takes out basically all your competitive guys except for Kawhi, Paul George, and Zubac. So, I mean, I think the Lakers tonight are going to have the edge, but, it's going to be a fun 7-game series when they get forwards. So, that's going to just about wrap things up today. Nick, it's been great having you here. One last thing I just want to get your take on. I know you're a big Knicks fan. What do you take on the Tom Thibodeau hire?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it. The one, I'm going to go with the optimistic approach, which is that this is somebody who has had some success, has been somebody who's built a winning culture. Whether it's translated to playoff wins is another thing, but at least built a winning culture everywhere he's been. And I think that's really important. You look at the teams who got big free agents last year. You look at the Brooklyn Nets, the Los Angeles Clippers, and these are teams that maybe they won between 38 and 45 games. But what that signaled to Kevin Durant and Kyrie and Kawhi Leonard was, this is a team that's serious about winning basketball games now, whereas the Knicks look like a team that was serious about having somebody come save them. And I think we need to change that stigma. But then there's the other side of it, which is that Thibodeau is a very tough coach. He's going to run his guys into the ground. Whether that's a good thing, whether that builds toughness and maybe brings back the Charles Oakley, Patrick Ewing Knicks, that would be really great. And I'm going to go with that optimistic. We're going to be a tough team. We're going to be a winning team, and we're going to maybe attract Giannis in a couple of years. That would be really great. But, that's just the same cycle we go through every few years.
Well, it'll be fun to see. Nick, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, that's going to wrap up today. Another new episode on Monday. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
This is Sports Speak.